see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogs on how to build a culture of empathy. And today I'm here with Jo Berry. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So we wanted to talk about how do we build a culture of empathy, and I thought we could perhaps, whoops, your video kind of dropped out there for a second, kind of threw me, but I think we're okay. So I thought we could do is maybe go through some of your websites and just to get to know you and then hear about your story as well, kind of your background, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, well, I thought maybe we'd just start with the picture on your Facebook page. What is that? Where you're sitting on the next to a lake, and it's a beautiful scene there.
Yes, it's from about 3 weeks ago when I was invited to Rwanda, and I'm actually sitting next to a lake, which, as you can see, is absolutely beautiful. But it's a place where an awful lot of suffering and violence happened during the genocide. And I took a moment away from the group who I was working with just to sit there and just to feel it really and to empathize and also just feel the absolute privilege of being in Rwanda doing the work that I was doing.
Yeah, so you're a real peace activist. You've created an organization building bridges for peace, and perhaps we could start with your story of what brought you to this work.
Yes, very happily I will. And a long time ago, 1984, my father was killed in a terrorist attack in England, and the group that killed him were the IRA from Northern Ireland. And my father was a Conservative politician, and he was attending a party conference at the Grand Hotel in Brighton when a bomb went off early in the morning, and he and 5 others were killed, and my stepmother was injured. And for me, it wasn't just that I lost my father that day. I lost part of me, and it was really important that I find a way to bring something positive out of what had happened. And even 2 days later, I made this commitment to try and understand those who'd killed him and to find a way to bring something positive out of it. And I know that's quite quick, but it was because of the person I think I already was. So a journey started, and there's a journey where I had no map, no name, nowhere to go. I was completely in the unknown. And yet I trusted that life was going to bring me experiences, and quite interestingly enough, one came really soon. Well, I ended up sharing a taxi with a random person. We were both waiting at the same time for taxis, and there weren't that many, and this was in London. So I shared a taxi, and I heard that his accent was Irish, and so I said to him that my father had just been killed and by the IRA, and he said that his brother had been in the IRA and his brother had been killed by a British soldier. So we should have been enemies. We came from different sides, and yet we talked about a world where peace was possible and where people didn't use violence to resolve conflict or to be heard. And so as I left him and the taxi, the words came to me, I can build a bridge across the divide. That's one way of helping. I saw him, I saw his humanity. I didn't see him as the enemy. And so that was a big step on my journey. And all the way on this journey, I didn't want to blame. I didn't want to make anybody an enemy. So when they actually had a court case, and they caught someone called Patrick McKee, and they sentenced him for several life imprisonments. I didn't want to see him as an enemy. For me, it was important to give up blame and give up judging. And it wasn't that I just one day decided to give up blame and that was it. No, each time I felt that pain and that grief, and I had a whole lot of secondary trauma, I had to work with that pain every time to take back the judgment and fixing it on a person and take that responsibility. So, a lot of inner work. And then in the year 2000, I got an opportunity to meet the man responsible, Patrick McKee, because he'd been released from prison as part of our peace process. And I always said, whenever I was doing any kind of workshops or meetings, that one day I'd like to meet him. And so the day came. And it literally was one morning I got a phone call to say I could meet him that evening in a friend's house. It wasn't done in a professional way. He just was at a friend's house. And I was really scared. I didn't know whether I was going to regret it or what I was going to feel. But I also, welcomed it. And I remember waiting in my friend's kitchen, and there was a knock on the door, and in he walked, and I shook his hand and said, thank you for coming. And he went, no, I thank you. And he was very polite, and we started talking straight away. And that first meeting was 3 hours long, which is quite a long time. And the first half of it, I wanted to listen to him. I wanted to hear his story, and so I asked lots of questions to go deeper into his own experience, and I also shared a bit about what happened to me. I'd been to Belfast in 85, 86, and about how wonderful my dad had been. And then after about an hour and a half, he stopped talking, and he rubbed his eye, and he said, I don't know who I am anymore. I want to hear your anger and your pain, and how can I help? And he moved from sort of politically kind of justifying and sort of giving his reasons to something completely different. He became open and vulnerable, and our conversation was on a whole nother level. And he definitely took off like a sort of political hat. And he would later say that my empathy that I gave him sort of disarmed him. He couldn't keep his position of justifying it and of speaking from a point of I suppose just justification. He had to take that off and begin to actually talk about the impact on him and me and emotionally, and so a whole new journey started in that moment. And when we got to about 3 hours, and I couldn't sustain it anymore because I was having to manage different parts of me that were feeling different things and thoughts, and I just couldn't listen anymore. And I actually hugged him and I said, thank you, I'm glad it's you. And he said, I'm really sorry, I killed your father. And what I meant was, I'm really glad it's you, was his preparedness to engage with me, to open up and become vulnerable. And I couldn't see just how far that was going to go, but I could see that in the way he'd acted, I was not expecting that at all, and I was fine. I was fine if he, he showed me enough of his story for me to see that he was someone who had humanity, and that would have been enough. So what I gained was a whole lot more. And with this journey that started that day, we're still on this journey. We went to Rwanda together, so we're sharing our story to a whole lot of people who are recovering and dealing with the incredible trauma that they've had from the genocide. And we've been to Lebanon, and I've just come back from doing a talk in a 3-day workshop in England, and he still amazes me with his preparedness to go deeper into his own pain and his own understanding, his violence and his recovery, and it's not easy journey he's on, and he supports me in my recovery and my journey, and then we share together. We always have like these very honest sharing, so we never know what we're going to say, and each time we speak it's different, and then we respond to questions, and it's always very powerful for everybody.
Yeah, so he'd been responsible for killing your father, and And you said you didn't want to kind of take being kind of judgmental or punitive. You're really looking for some kind of other way, sort of a peaceful, more empathic way. But how do you think you were kind of predisposed for that? Where did that energy kind of come from that you would take that position?
It came very much from the person I had been before the bomb had gone off, which was somebody who I had spent a couple of years living in the Himalayas, and I very much believed in inner work and meditation. That was my way, and I thought that we could achieve peace through meditation, which actually didn't feel true when the bomb had gone off. That really, really didn't feel true anymore. I seem to have a cat here now. But I sort of saw myself as a spiritual person, and I remember actually as a child very much sort of wanting to understand people. I remember hearing someone on the radio who was getting life imprisonment for murdering someone, and having a conversation with my mum about. I actually remember saying, I must be about 10. So what was it that caused him to become a murderer? I'm just wondering what happened to him. Of course, the news item, it wouldn't have given the reasons. So I think that looking back, I always had this part of me that wanted to understand the reasons, why people did things, and wanted to understand and make sense of it. And so it was like when the bomb went off, was I going to give up on everything I believed in and in myself? Or was I going to find a way to even understand the most painful thing? Because, I absolutely, adored my dad. We had an incredibly good relationship, and it's such a violent way to lose someone. I mean, it's the pain was overwhelming, and I found, because from terrorism, it was like it opened me up to other forms of violence. So I would feel and understand when other people lost their loved ones to bombs or in war. So it opened me up to the reality of war. I could no longer just be detached about it. Of course, everyone's pain is going to be different, but it definitely gave me an empathy I didn't have before. And so the next step was to sort of empathize, and I felt like I was following his footsteps. Like before I met Pat, I met lots of people who knew him, and that was all part of it. And one of the ways I was following his footsteps was sort of understanding the parts of me that wouldn't empathize with him. And I discovered that part of me, before I met him, had a whole feeling of betrayal. I thought that if I met somebody who was part of the IRA, that I was betraying my father. And I went through a whole sort of emotional process of betrayal. And what I discovered at the end of that was actually there is no betrayal. There is no other. There is no enemy. These men in the IRA could have been my brothers, and that the only real betrayal I felt after that was the betrayal of my heart, which actually knows that, I'm connected with everyone, and that there is no other, because I genuinely believe that when I really hear someone's story, like I did Pat's, what's left is an understanding that if I had lived his life with like everything he'd gone through, I may have gone the same route. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to know. And so it kind of, makes sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that I believe in violence or anything. I don't. I do not believe in violence, and but that to me is something separate. So.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, what would you say is your most important value in life? If there's one value that was kind of like, when I've asked this of people, they tend to have like one value that's kind of like a guiding light for them. And I'm wondering what yours is.
Well, it probably changes because I'm always changing. But I mean, right now, it's empathy. I feel that empathy has given me so much, and still does. And I can't say I'm an expert in it, but it seems to me it's the way to go. I think for me, ever since Pat said to me that he was disarmed by empathy, I've had this idea of disarming the world with empathy, through empathy. and it's just such a kind of a quick way to sort of just, I say, like disarm the parts of us that would feel separate and judgment and not seeing the humanity in the other. Because if we do see somebody in their full humanity, the chances are we're not going to want to hurt them. Part of the work I do in Rwanda or in Lebanon, it's part of the work Pat and I do is facilitating others who have been enemies to see each other as human beings. And that is just, for me, so important. And I think we all have that potential to empathize. So.
Yeah, you said that it kind of has been changing through your life. Do you know when it kind of shifted to empathy? Was there like some kind of an incident where it said, "Oh, hey, this is really the key here. This is," where you have that aha moment, or was it like a slow progression getting to empathy, or was it that moment with Pat where he said, "Oh, you've disarmed me," or what? I was just wondering where that shift kind of came.
That's a really good question, and I think that I'm someone who I'm a feeling person, and quite often the words come to me later. And so I was sort of following this intuition of wanting to understand Pat. And it was only looking back on it that I could see the power of empathy. And it was sort of, I suppose, other people giving me back that reflection. And there was somebody who decided to analyse the metaphor that Pat and I were using in our first few meetings. So she had hours and hours of tape, which she then transcribed, and she was a professor of linguistics. And she worked out that how much empathy there was there, and she then started an empathy network, an international empathy network. A lot of academics. I've been working with them. So I think it's just sort of growing and growing, I suppose, the importance of empathy. And especially the last few months, it seems a real key, and I see it in my daughters, because I've raised them very much to be able to listen to each other and to acknowledge each other, and I've wanted to always create win-win solutions with them and to not judge them and not blame. And I can see now they're 16, 19, 21, how much they empathize naturally, with their friends and how they see the world and with the work that they're doing.
So it sounds like you're saying that you kind of had the feeling of empathy, and it was later that the vocabulary, maybe the word, kind of came to kind of match that. I find that for myself, it was very similar. That throughout, right. I did a lot of traveling around the world, and it was kind of starting to learn about other people and seeing the importance of just how people are and relating to them and that whole relationship part. And then it was only kind of more recently that I found the word. It's like, oh, that's the word. This is empathy. This is a thing I've kind of always really valued. So it's good to have the vocabulary of it. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, let's see. You've also created an organization building bridges for peace, and so you're on kind of this journey to to bring reconciliation, for fostering empathy, and you've created this organization building bridges for peace, which I can show here on the screen, and that's you're with some students, and it looks like and Pat McKee.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about the organization and how that came about?
Well, it's registered as a charity. It's the first stage. I still got to get it fully registered, and the idea came out of the fact that a lot of the times I'm asked to work in different parts of the world with Pat, and there's never any funding. So we got an open invitation to go to Palestine and Israel, and I'd love to go there. I've met and worked with a lot of groups from there, like Combatants for Peace, who are extraordinary, and others as well. And so I thought, well, if we become a charity, then it's easier to get the support and the resources. But it's still in very early stages, because I've got a a big vision, as you can probably imagine, of where I want to take this work, and it's about being able to be more effective in the world. So I've just been finding a few more trustees, and I've got a funding application. The deadline is in a few days, and so I'm working on that. But my hope, well, not my hope, my intent really is to do a lot more of this work. I'm also interested in how we change how governments resolve conflict in different parts of the world, how we create like a culture of peace. But for me, the reason why I don't use, I mean, the word peace is in the website name, and it's important, but it's not just about, white doves or meditating. I mean, to me, it's important looking at peace to be able to empathize with those who use violence. I think that's where I'm a little bit different. I'm always interested in understanding why anybody would use violence, and that would be a government who believes it's the best way to protect people, or if it's somebody who decides to be a suicide bomber, on a London tube. It seems we have to understand in order to change the circumstances or give other choices. So I want to tackle that hard, that hard area, and I'm not scared of that area. I think it's really important to go there, and that's why I suppose empathy is, become such a big part of it. I don't want to shy away and just sort of rise above into a peaceful place. It's like got to dig deep into the difficult places. And actually, I think the most difficult place is the sort of the violence inside me, inside us all. Because I think until I've really acknowledged and kind of understood that, then I really can't do this work. And because I think we project what we don't perhaps understand in ourselves onto other people, and when I'm with Pat, it'd be very easy to project enemy and baddie onto him. I mean, he did plant the bomb that killed my father. So the only way that I can sit there and empathize is by owning that part of me. And I think that's a little bit different from other people who are doing peace work. So, so that's why empathy is a big part of it, to understand and not to judge. At the same time, I also believe, and I'd like to know what you think about this, I also believe that we can challenge behaviour, because we need to. It's not about just letting people override our boundaries and, be violent to us, not at all. But it's about challenging almost through empathy, so challenging without blaming. Is that something that you've been?
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm so excited about talking to you, because this is something that's really I've been looking at too, because there's this whole peace movement, and it has a whole history. And for me, it seems that an empathy movement kind of resonates more with me, because sometimes, the peace movement, it can be confrontational in the sense that I'm going to beat you over the head so that you're peaceful, kind of. And so so there's not it seems kind of muddled within the structure of the peace movement. There's also, like George Bush says, he talked about peace all the time. We have to go into Iraq to create peace, kind of, right? So it's like, how do we create peace? And I really like the phrase, the quote from Johann Galtung, who said, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, with nonviolence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending process. And I just find that empathy component is the part that gets kind of lost, and it is kind of like central to it. So so you're starting to talk about some of those qualities and those dynamics. And so what I was hearing you say is that, okay, with empathy, it's like you don't want your boundaries ridden. It's like, okay, I'm going to empathize with you, but there's a sense of boundaries as well. So the way I've kind of looking at it is we need a culture of empathy, and to be empathy activists or evangelical empathy, in the sense that, right, it's like not just saying, well, I will empathize with you, and that's kind of the end of it. It's like, I will empathize with you, and I want a culture of empathy. I want the whole culture to maximize empathy. And then people might say, you know, I think empathy is weak. I feel empathy doesn't work. And then you need to use the means of empathy to empathize with what people's concerns are. You know what I mean? So empathy is the vision, the goal, as well as the means to kind of get there. And I think it sounds to me like that's what you're kind of been doing, really, is using the wanting connection with people and then using the means of empathy to get to that empathic connection.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I've done interviews and I've been set up with somebody who's meant to have opposing views with me. So there'd be someone who'd come on the radio who would be really angry with me, you know, and perhaps he'd represent being a British soldier. So the interviewer would expect me to justify my position, and instead, you know, I've always sort of then empathized with the person and wanted to know more about their experience and, you know, what they're angry about, and really empathize with them, and we end up having an amazing conversation, which I'd much rather, because I'm not attached to my point of view. I don't need to persuade anyone at all. This is just, you know, for me, I'm far more interested in holding, you know, I hold the truth of all sides in me, you know, and that's the way forward. And when I see people in the peace movement who are very angry, they're demonizing, they're blaming all their problems on another group, to me that's part of the problem that we have in this world, where we always have in different forms, you know, the goodies and the baddies, you know, and then we have righteousness on our side. Well, actually, you know, I've given that up. And, you know, I suppose I saw in my dad, I saw his humanity and understood that he was working for peace before he was killed, you know, and from there, that's helped me, and a whole lot of other things have happened. But I'm far more interested in sort of humanity healing together through recognizing that we all have valid positions, you know, we all have our truths. And I think, you know, we're all doing our best given what we've been through and everything that's happened. And it's possible to challenge behavior, but in such a way that you're most likely to hear it. You know, because I mean, I've learned that if I'm trying to change you and I'm just saying, you know, well, pointing my finger and going, you know, saying that, you know, you're bad, then straight away we got that argument going. But if I actually communicate with an I message and say what I'm feeling and describing your behavior, and then like asking you, you know, is there anything that you can think we could communicate differently, then immediately we got that creativity of looking at it in a different way and more likely to have another solution. So that's, you know, that's how I parented right from very early on, and it really interests me that it really happens, you know, even if I go into schools and how teachers are with the kids, or I see parents in the supermarket, or you see governments with their making decisions, that culture's not that strong yet, is it?
It's very hard. Even going, I used to think, well, you know, the progressive community was kind of like my community, and you know, but it's like the things you're talking about, you know, self-righteousness and all that kind of stuff, that now I think there's almost a need for a separate community, an empathy community, or I call it the empathy party movement,
Right.
where it's like, you know, neither side, and we have our, you know, really divided government here in the United States, progressives and conservatives, and I mean, it is just so, you know, dysfunctional. And it's really, it needs almost like a third party of like a mediator, an empathic mediator that can empathize with both sides and, you know, have the role of almost like mediators, but not just be the mediators, but for me at least, it's like not just that we're mediators, empathic mediators, but that I stand for a culture of empathy. It's like, I want to convert you to a culture of empathy. You know, I think we need so that's kind of my position. And I've been to, here we have, you know, the Republican Party, and I've been to the Republican Party conventions and interviewed Republicans. I've been to the Democratic convention, interviewed them about empathy.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's really about listening to the deeper feelings and what the concerns are
Yeah.
and the fears. It's like I talked to the conservatives and I said, well, what's your most important value? And it was a couple of young Republicans. They said protection. Anybody hurt me and my family, we're going to protect ourselves. And
Mm.
so I didn't say, well, you're wrong about protecting yourself. It's like I said, oh, you want to, I just heard. I said, you're
Mm.
wanting to protect yourself.
Mm.
And I just kept reflecting, hearing what was it want, and it was like, yeah, security is important. We want the sense of security, and okay, you want security, and then it was, but then it was, I made the connection. I said, so you're concerned people will break into your house and do you harm in some way,
Mm.
and I said, so you're concerned that people will not empathize with you because if people are empathizing with you, they won't do you harm. So you value empathy is important to you. And they said, yeah, I guess so. And then I said, well, what can we do together to create more empathy? And we had like a great conversation about that. So that was kind of like just listening and reflecting and hearing and empathizing, but
Mm.
then bringing in the dialogue about how do we create more empathy was just kind of an approach that I found, created a connection with me
Mm.
and them.
Mm. Oh, so wonderful. Oh, can I ask you a question?
Sure, I'd love this is a
Um,
dialogue, so we're just
okay.
chatting here.
I'm just thinking, like, when something happens and then and you're thrown back into feeling pain or anger, do you still have part of you that wants to blame someone, that still looks to see, who's wrong, look to find someone else responsible, or have you completely transformed that impulse?
Oh, yeah, especially with people close to me, family and stuff. That's the hardest part,
Right.
right? It's because you're just in the
Mm.
in the in the in the how the relationship's going to work. So I get pissed off and and so forth. But one thing I find is kind of developing resilience. I've noticed that if I have people who will listen to me and where I
Mm.
feel heard, that my it's almost like an empathy battery
Yeah.
gets filled, and the higher and I've heard, I think they call it resilience in some of the literature, is that
Mm.
as we've been heard and seen and been felt, that
Mm.
I feel like less lonely, and somehow I can viscerally feel a spaciousness kind of in my heart and
Mm.
in my soul, kind of.
Mm.
And then I have it somehow I'm able to relate, I'm more grounded and able to listen to others. So
Mm.
there's something about, I think that we need, like empathy filling stations, right? Where
Yeah.
we can go and be heard and kind of rate. I mean, I'm thinking of starting a church of empathy because it's like we need almost a weekly dose. It's like
Mm.
workshops. A
Mm.
workshop once a year or something just doesn't cut it. It's like
Mm.
this
Mm.
need this ongoing support for kind of an empathic being.
Mm.
So, but I guess
Mhm.
we kind of started from the point of, do I still get pissed off? And I get pissed off,
Mm.
and but I think it's kind of like it's a
Yeah.
learning, growing, developing process.
Yeah. So do you think you've got sort of quicker at sort of not fixing that pissed offness on someone, so that you kind of see it happening, and then you kind of can take it back? Is that so? Let's say, I don't know, something happens in a shop, or someone's really rude and gets you, and then you might go, wanting to blame them, and then you'll become aware of that, and then you'll sort of take that responsibility and start sort of listening to yourself, giving yourself support, or whatever you do. Is that? I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what the inner process is for you.
Well, a process. Yeah. One place where your video your video drops out every couple times, but it doesn't matter. Um, I do this freestyle dance on every Wednesday and Sunday, and in the dance, once I was just looking at myself, And I thought, well, I have a lot of fear. I can feel my anxiety, just life's fear and anxiety, and I could feel it kind of through my core. And I
Okay.
and I said, instead of kind of avoiding it or whatever, I want to get as close as I can to it.
Hmm.
And as I was dancing, I would like kind of feel it and try to expand the feeling within myself to, oh, here's that fear. It's very dark. It's very jagged. Let me get closer. Let it fill more of my body. And then it kind of like dissolved, I found. And then within like 3-5 seconds, another one appeared. And this one was like a heavy fear of kind of like a over my head, kind of an oppressive, kind of a little alienation. And so I did the same thing, went to that fear. And so I kept doing that for like an hour. There was somebody I would dance with who she would always turn and walk away. Um, when I was dancing, and it made me feel kind of rejected and as a pain, right?
Yeah.
And then so I said, okay, I want to get as close to that feeling of rejection as possible. And then that presence, she didn't leave. And then it kind of kept one thing after another kept coming up, right? Kept being present, kept being present. And it was really that quality of trying to go to the fear, be present with the fear that seemed to dissolve it. And at the end of the dance, I was like almost like in this state of bliss. It was just so beautiful having transitioned through all these fears. And so I think it kind of addresses what you're talking about is the quality of, I still get, kind of set off with, aggravations, but I can feel myself looking more at the underlying, like, well, what is going on underneath here, and kind of face it and be present. So try to be present with it. And, so I think it's a long-term process. It's a lifelong process, I think, for doing that. And I mean, there's another situation where I was in a kind of a workshop where I was a lot of empathy. I was, getting really seen and felt, and I could feel the spaciousness within myself. And when I went into the dance, I really mirrored other people. And I just noticed that I had these beautiful connections because of that kind of that resilience of having my empathy battery filled. So going into the shop, in another way, saying, if I've been filled, my empathy battery has been filled, going into the shop where somebody kind of does something that would maybe piss me off, is my tolerance is much, my grounding is much deeper for actually being present with that person and not kind of going into the judging so that's a long-winded answer, I think, too.
Oh, well, no, thank you for sharing. So you found ways to support you. And I think that's the clue, isn't it? We've all got our own ways that we can get in touch with the feelings and move them on and get that support. And I know, dance is a wonderful way. I've had experience of dance as well. So,
well, what are your ways of dealing with it then? Where are you kind of it sounds like you're looking at where are you in your own development and feelings in terms of deepening your empathic connection with others.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm always aware of when I'm feeling hurt. It's almost like the two parts of me, the part that wants to latch on to blaming someone, and then the part that wants to take responsibility and transform it. And the part that wants to transform it, maybe I need to play the piano or dance or get support from a friend who will listen to me rant, which is always really important to have those people who just listen, or, bash a cushion or whatever. And I think I am getting better at catching it. I mean, every now and again, things happen that just, are overwhelming, and there's a lot more emotional work to do again. So I always feel like I'm at the beginning of this work. I don't feel secure yet in my always being empathic. It is a daily choice. It's a daily work. But I'm thinking about, like, with my daughter seems so much further ahead than I am, because I think it's the way that when they were little, I did so much just acknowledging their feelings. And quite often with feelings, when we're little, we're told that we're wrong to have those feelings, or really we're feeling something else. And I really believe that lack of empathy has like a legacy it leaves, from when we were really, really little, and self-esteem is affected. And my girls have always been listened to. And I remember when the eldest was about 3, she would say to me, her sister would have been 2.5 years younger than her, so 6 months, and she would say to me, "Mum, I'm really feeling jealous, like I might want to hit my sister. Would you take her away from me?" Which, I think is phenomenal self-awareness. And sometimes she would, when she was a little bit older, she would like tell me what she was feeling, and she would go, she was feeling jealous and angry and all these reasons why, and I would just listen to her without any judgment. So, the bottom line would be, she might say, "I don't want to have a sister, take her away." And I would say, "So you really, right at this minute," I'd always put it in that moment, like, you don't want your sister here, you want her to go, you want to be the only child. Yes, yes. And then she'd get to a point where she'd go, "But I really love my sister, and I'd miss her." And then I go, "Oh, so you'd really miss it?" "Yes, I think I'm going to go and play with her now." So she'd go from like this utter anger to just loving her again. And I really feel it's because she had that space to let out her jealousy, her hatred, her anger, her frustration, and that's such a big part of it, that to be truly empathic, we need to be able to acknowledge all the other stuff as well, and then that's what's left. And for creating a culture of empathy, to me, it's with the children. It's how we communicate with our children that is the key. I'd love to do some more work with parents and with teachers on that.
Yeah, so it's like, well, that's kind of what these dialogues are about, is looking at how do we create a culture of empathy. And, it's like, how do we raise empathy to be like perhaps the predominant social value in our world culture. And sounds like you're saying, well, one way is really to start at a young age and to empathize with children where they are. I like to, a lot of these dialogues, I start with a metaphor. Empathy is seen as standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes. And I'll say, well, what's your metaphor for empathy? And someone once said, empathy is like a special room where whoever you are can be seen. It's the full range of emotions. So like with your daughter, you didn't say, you should not feel that way about your sister. You said you empathized with her, you were empathic, you embodied empathy, and then she felt that, and then that let her reconnect empathically, and then reconnect to her sister. So you're using the means of empathy to foster like this culture of empathy.
Yes, exactly. And I think that, empathy is within us all, and that quicker than sort of, giving children a lesson in empathy is actually empathizing with them. And then they will naturally be, empathic. I think it is sort of almost, contagious. So by example, by being empathic, I think it's really powerful. I've seen it so many times with young people. I've been empathic with one of them, and then they've gone and empathized with one of their friends, and that's just how they are. Rather than, a teacher deciding to have a class on empathy one day, and they've been shouting at the kids and telling them they're wrong, and then they have a class on empathy. I think that's more difficult, actually.
Yeah, I kind of like, it's like, it's like it's like doing empathy versus just talking about it, or like a lot of the schools, they'll say, well, be nice or whatever, have the
Yeah.
things on the wall, right? And then the actual lived experience is different.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the integrity of bringing them together, because I just interviewed Christian Kiesler's, who's at a neuroscience lab in Amsterdam. And so he's studying the mechanisms of empathy. So I really like that part of it as well. He studies mirror neurons. He's written a book, The Empathic Brain, which is available, online as well, for really cheap for downloading. So it's really, it's having the science and the cognitive part so that I can respond to people. Say, well, some people, will argue, well, empathy it doesn't really work because we're greedy, selfish beings, So, and then I say, well, mirror neurons shows. Well, first I'll start by empathizing, right? Oh, you feel people are really greedy, selfish beings, and so I go into that part of it. But then after they've really been heard, their sense of, oh, the world is this terrible place, and they've really been heard about it. And then, it's that part of doing, as well as having the saying, well, there are these mirror neurons that show how empathy really works. So, can bring in that, science as well. So I think it's good to have both of those, the structure as well as the being. I don't know if that resonates.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I'd love to read his book. I think I will. I'll download it and read it. It would be very helpful to know more about that. So
yeah, the interview will be online in a couple of days too, along with yours. So yeah, so let's see, we're talking. Let's see, so you've got this website. I didn't want to go through the different web pages here, show those. So you had the Building Bridges for Peace. There was an international network for peace too, that you're working with, or how are you kind of involved with them?
Well, that was actually started by a group in America called Peaceful Tomorrows, who all lost family members on 9/11, and some of them would have said the day after, not in our name. They did not want any killing in their name, and they've done some incredible work on empathy. I mean, some of them have gone to Iraq and met families who have been, most of the families have been killed by American bombs, and listened to them, and they're completely, I just find so inspiring. They didn't really have time, some of them, to get the emotional support. They just acted straight away, and did not want anyone else hurt. Anyway, they've become my friends, and they invited me to an international conference now about 5 years ago, and they invited people from all around the world who'd been affected by violence, terrorism, war, a whole range of different things, and who are working to transform their grief into action for peace. And we all came together. It was interesting because we had several languages going, but we all shared something which was beyond language, and it was for me, it was just to discover that, after all these years of sort of very much working on my own in this area, suddenly finding there are people around the world who felt the same way, who were as passionate as I am, taking the kind of risks I am, and who just understand. It makes sense to them because they're doing the same thing. And so we created the International Network for Peace. Sadly, we haven't had to meet since then. So I've met different participants in different parts of the country. Like when I was in Rwanda, I met someone who is part of that network. I feel very strongly that I am part of something that just is all the way around the world. And I'm sure there's been some interesting research done into this, and I certainly don't know the answer, but it interests me how you get a whole lot of people who've gone through some appalling atrocity like 9/11 or the mid-bombings or terrorism or like the London bombings, and you get these people who straight away want to use and change their experience into empathizing and working for peace. You know? And I don't know what makes some people go that route and some people go another route. I've absolutely no idea, but I'm sure there's been a lot of research, and maybe your friend you just interviewed will have had some answers into that. But it's just so fulfilling to meet these people and to be connected with them. And that actually gives me more strength to know that there's people like Peaceful Tomorrows in America. And I'm going to be coming to America soon in October, November, and I will be meeting them again. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had done a lot of this work by yourself, and now you're starting to really network with a whole community, and there's that sense of community support, the people who have the same vision
Yeah.
and values. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so you've gone to, you had a photo that we talked about beforehand that where you and Pat McKee were in a garden. And so you're going to all these different places around the world, I guess, to kind of do this work of promoting empathy. And
Well, we're just starting to. But I mean, it's more we just give people an experience. When we speak on a stage, and they know that we're there and that Pat killed my father, straight away there's an electric kind of listening happen because it is that unusual still. And we just make it up. We just share what we're feeling, what we've been through, and so there's always an incredible listening. But that photograph is that's the one in the gardens in Kigali in Rwanda. It's the incredible genocide museum, and outside the museum there are these gardens that go through a whole lot of different themes, and they're full of symbology and beauty and fountains and flowers, and we're told to take you on a journey. I think it's a fantastic memorial. And towards the end there's the Garden of Reconciliation, and we were standing there, and I said to Pat, I said I was just completely overwhelmed by everything. I just said, this is such a privilege to be here. And he said yes, and he said, actually it's such a privilege to be with you here, in the Garden of Reconciliation. And we sort of both had tears, and it was just such a powerful moment, that we're there in this land which has experienced, more pain than you could imagine, and they are doing incredible work in reconciliation there and empathy, and they're doing a whole peace building in schools, and it's amazing, but there we are standing in this garden sort of together, and sometimes it's almost too much for us that we are actually, this is happening, because we still find it quite extraordinary that we do meet. I mean, sometimes it's just sort of normal, but every now and again you just get that moment of, my goodness, here we are, and that was one of those moments, and we were both very emotional. And then the next few days we shared a lot and met people who had so much pain and yet were meeting the other, and people empathizing, and I say it's just such a privilege. Yeah.
yeah, so these people have had deep pain, and then they come together to kind of address that and to share it and kind of for it to be seen. And yeah. Well, my parents, they were actually, talking about just the pain is, they were in Germany in World War II, as children. They were German, but they were in the eastern part of Germany. So, and in East Prussia and Eastern Poland. So they went, on my father's side, everyone was killed, and he was, in the house that he was hiding, and, the Russian soldiers came in and shot everybody. And so my mother had, kind of similar, the people weren't shot, but, the kind of the gang rapes and all that kind of experience. So, this kind of goes through the world, throughout the world, is and this history, it's in our bodies and the feelings, and my mother used to talk about, she would even living, they moved to the United States, but even she would wake up at night and there'd be, like the branches, the wind maybe rustling against the windows, and she would, wake up in terror that, the soldiers were going to come in and kind of rape and all that, so there's just, there's so much pain and suffering everywhere. And I see the empathy is, there's the empathy of kind of addressing what's that and kind of the reconciliation. But it seems to me we need a culture of empathy where we head off that kind of conflict in the first place, that we need a cultural transformation where we have the skills of empathy, taught, like you're saying, in the schools, and look at the, the whole social structure. How can the social system, foster empathy throughout the system? So, and, trying to look at how to put that together in a more systematic, kind of a way, what can we do there's some initiatives in the United States, for teaching empathy in all the schools, through the Ashoka, and I think a large part of it is just dialoguing. I asked people, well, how do we create a culture of empathy? They said, start talking about it, just create a dialogue. And that's what I see is these dialogues as being is just, we're bringing it up. We're talking about it. If other people watch, they know, hey, I'm not by myself. You mentioned that you were by yourself before, feeling, well, I'm just working on this. There's no one else there. But if you can see that there's others that you can share and, not be alone around it.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And well, no, and thanks for sharing your personal story. And I think that we can't really sort of imagine the way, like the legacy of what we inherit from that kind of story. And of course, with your parents, they wouldn't have been given the kind of support, the understanding of post-traumatic stress, or that we have available now. And I think that generation had to deal with so much without understanding the effects of trauma, and I think it can get passed on to the children, the next generation. And I'm just wondering, did you have to do any work in terms of healing that, or have you empathized with those? Have you begun to understand those, the stories of those soldiers, and is that something you've gone into, or?
Yeah, we didn't go into the soldiers. I did 2 documentaries about their lives. So we actually went back to where it is now Poland, and actually went to the farms where they were and kind of heard the stories. So I think that just having a chance for them to have shared their stories, for it to be, the videos are online. You can search Rutsch family history. And, you can, I think that was like one step. And, when I grew up, it was kind of the 60s, and there was the generation gap, right? It's like, I thought, oh, I got the answers. I know how things should be, and all this arguing and all that. And I've really come to see that, it's really about empathizing. And my parents are evangelical, conservative Christians. They vote Republican. I vote Democratic, was more on the progressive side. And, I try to convince them about things. And now I just see the importance of just hearing what's important to them. So I think there's kind of like that transformation. So there's kind of different levels of transformation, that are kind of happening. There hasn't.
So what amazing gift that you took your parents back and like did a story about that. That's an incredible gift that you gave them. Wow.
Yeah, they seem to really were kind of grateful for that experience, and then
must have been really healing.
I think so. I think it contributes. I think there's the healing is ongoing.
Sure.
It's
sure.
It's having that scene, but I think learning kind of skills of empathy, learning. One is like we were saying, getting that resilience. So it's like. I almost feel like we need a starting point. It's like everybody feels everybody else is not empathizing with them. So it's got to start somewhere. It's like you need a group that is full of empathy that can kind of create the positive and I feel, so, that and then to get others involved, like I'm slowly working on my family, talking about empathy, and at first they're very skeptical, and I can really see there's a shift. They're starting to talk about it more. They're starting to look at family dynamics, the problems within the family. People are different relatives are kind of aggravated with each other, kind of pissed off, don't want to talk. And then really using empathy to, bring people together. And I always kind of bring that up as well. We need to hear each other, and actually do the hearing. So, and do the empathic listening. So,
Yeah.
there's so many different levels to work at, within the family, within society, with healing the trauma, for trying to create the, programs, processes for promoting empathy. So it's really great. I mean, this has really been a wonderful conversation, because I can really see you've really given us a lot of thought. You're right there at the cutting edge of looking at this and looking at how to promote empathy.
And there's one thing we haven't talked about. I just thought of it. Of course, it's the way that I could meet Pat and empathize him that first meeting was that I was giving myself empathy at the same time. And without that, I don't think I could have, And that's been an incredible tool, and that allows me to take risks and do a whole lot of things which could be challenging. Is that I now have that sort of that inner resource, and maybe that builds the resilience. But I can give myself empathy, and recently my daughter, she's in the other side of the world, and she asked me to remind her how she could give herself that empathy, because I wasn't with her to give it, so I'm like doing it on instant messaging, and I think it's an incredible tool which can just can just help us to be empathic to others, really. Does that make sense to you?
It kind of brings up the question of what is the definition of empathy. I could just say that I see empathy as 4 parts to it. And the academics, they kind of disagree about but from my own, kind of synthesizing. So the first part is self-empathy, which you just brought up.
Okay.
So it's really about sensory awareness of reading my own body, what's going on, mindfulness and the arts and so many different practices, just like your photograph is sitting next to the lake, right? This beautiful lake. It looks so serene. And it looks like you're kind of in a self-empathy mode there, just kind of connecting to yourself, what's going on, kind of getting rid of any judgments and the things that kind of tamp down empathy, kind of being present, mindfulness. And as we have that, our empathy, our awareness kind of opens, so we become more receptive to what I call mirrored empathy, which is, through mirror neurons, that we mirror other people's motions and emotions. And so as you're shaking your head, I can feel, my own head inside mirrors that. And as you're smiling, I can kind of feel that. So the kind of the more spacious we are, kind of the more we can kind of resonate with others through this mirrored empathy.
Right.
The third part is kind of imaginative empathy, which kind of adds layers of kind of perspective taking, or sometimes the academics call it cognitive empathy. So I can kind of imagine your situation, and that imagination kind of taps into that mirrored empathy as kind of like a foundation. So they're very closely related. And then the fourth part is empathic action, that now you and I have been talking. I mean, then what will we do next? How will we work together, maybe? And I kind of got that from different sources, but once I interviewed Dominic Barter, who does restorative circle process.
Oh, right, I know.
And it's, kind of a restorative justice kind of techniques, and he calls it restorative circles. And it's that when people are in conflict, that they, you bring them together, they start empathizing with each other, and then they actually do something together. They create like a plan of how they're going to go into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And he says empathy is when the blocks to action are removed that don't exclude. So you're kind of bringing everyone in and you're doing an action, and there's no block to the action because everybody feels heard. Because, in meetings, people kind of will have an action. Somebody says, well, we're going to do this. And it's like, I'm not on board. I'm going to block in subtle ways. I'm not going to support that action because they haven't been heard. So anyway, that's the kind of basic framework I'm using. So I just wonder how that resonates with your understanding of empathy.
It sounds good to me. I mean, I think that the self-empathy just carries on, all the time. I think I suppose it's the constant, perhaps with the other three. I sometimes have days when I forget, and then in those days I will ring up my friends or go around and see them to be reminded, so they can be that voice. But actually, the self-empathy, I think, is there, all the time now.
What does that look like, or what's the experience of that? What's the dynamics of what happens?
Well, good question. So, as I'm a feeling person, so I go through a whole range of feelings, and sometimes I can get a feeling of sort of sadness or unease, and I don't know what that's about, and straight away, regardless of sort of what's happening out there, I'll just be acknowledging my feelings, and I'll just be acknowledging and helping myself just accept the feeling, and then quite often it then changes. Or like when I was giving a talk for 120 people last week, and at one point something happened. I had a voice in my head which was going, well, you said all that wrong, like criticizing me, and so whilst I'm on the stage with Patrick, and whilst there are people in the audience, I've got this conversation in my head where I'm, acknowledging the words and then giving myself, actually, once I heard it, some positive feedback, because that wasn't, wouldn't have been very helpful to carry on just criticizing myself. I wouldn't have been able to carry on giving the talk. So all the time I'm aware of what's in the way of me listening to 120 people, which is what I was doing, and Pat, and that's an awful lot to be doing. And I'm open. I open myself when I do these talks. So I do a lot of self-empathy to make sure that I'm just able to hear. And sometimes the thoughts and emotions that come need to be expressed and communicated, and then I need to know which ones are. So I can't say I've got it all like sorted all the time, but definitely that listening to myself, which actually is giving myself empathy. It's fine. And then afterwards, if I've been vulnerable and taken risks, then I really need to give myself self-empathy. And I suppose it also turns into some point self-love as well, like that appreciation, which I kind of think is part of empathy, be able to appreciate myself as well. So because I've still got a very strong critic in me, which I can give you lots of reasons of why it was there when I was younger, and it would have been the voices of teachers and all sorts of people. But it's now in my head, and I have to very much work with that part of me, and give that part empathy as well, because that part's, got a part to play as well. So it's like managing all the sort of different parts of me and all my complex emotions and things.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like acknowledging them in those parts, saying, oh, it's like something's kind of say, oh, I'm feeling judgmental right now.
Yeah.
And just kind of acknowledging those feelings, and sometimes sharing it, like, oh, like now like right now, if I said, we've gone for about an hour and 11 minutes, I'm a little concerned that going overtime for Joe, that maybe she has other things going. I'm feeling like, uh-oh, better say something. I don't know how you are on time. If we're
It's fine. Yes, we have. This has gone on for a long time. And there I was at the beginning thinking an hour was such a long amount of time. It's gone so quickly.
yeah, I feel
No,
like we've barely
I'm fine.
scratched the surface here.
I'm fine. So
Okay, well, we
I'm
can
just
go a
happy.
little bit longer then. That would be
Okay, we
that,
go on a few more minutes, so it'll be
okay.
absolutely fine.
Oh, good. So yeah, so it's really the self-empathy is acknowledging what's coming up and giving. Sometimes, like in the mindfulness community, it's the importance of giving a word to it. Say, oh, there's sadness, or there's whatever's coming up, and just kind of letting it kind of pass through without trying to clamp it down or judge it, and
Yeah,
kind of suppress it in some way.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. I would love to kind of keep the conversation going at some other point too, because it's really about the networking as well. I'm looking at how do we build a movement. Like there is a peace movement in place, but I kind of am looking for kind of an empathy movement that starts. That kind of gets away from a lot of the dynamics of the peace movement, instead of trying to work through those. Really start with a clear empathy movement as kind of like the foundational, core of it. Because I really feel that peace is really just like a byproduct. It's kind of like it's like making alcohol, right? It's like, the fermentation. The real dynamics is in the fermentation part of it. And then alcohol is kind of like this byproduct, right, of the yeast and all that kind of stuff. And so the empathy is really like transforming the sugars, with empathy, with the, the bacteria. And peace is just like a byproduct that, if we focus on the creation, it's just we'll have the peace. We'll just kind of be there. So.
Well, again, great. I'm completely with you on that. I mean, my latest project is about, disarming the world through empathy. It's the name of my new project. So.
Oh wow. So
and I haven't got very far with it yet, but.
Well, we'd love to talk to you more about that. Maybe do another dialogue at some point about going into like what is your plans for the future, and how do you imagine taking the work of promoting empathy, fostering empathy, nurturing empathy into the future.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And you're in LA, is that right?
I'm in San Francisco area.
Oh, in San Francisco,
near
sorry.
Berkeley. It's called El Cerrito, but it's right next to Berkeley.
Oh, well, I'd love to come there. Maybe we can find a way where I can come and share my story there, and then we could meet and start plotting about empathy.
Yeah, well, we'd love to do that, as well as plot online, because it's it's this new window of Skype is such a great tool for connecting.
It is good. It's wonderful.
So
wonderful, yeah.
Okay, then I guess we'll bring it to a close now, and maybe via email we can discuss more about maybe having another dialogue about looking at what are the next steps, what can we do to maybe network, and also do panel discussions. We can have up to 8 or 9 people in one of these discussions, so I find like 5 is a good amount. So if there's people who you think are really interested in the empathy, fostering empathy, we could have some dialogues around that. So that's another thing to think about.
Yes, very open to that. I've got some ideas, so let's talk on email. So.
Okay, great. Then Joe, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I'm so excited about having met you, and just feels like it's such a great connection.
Oh, thank you. This has been great, wonderful. So thanks so much for asking me.
Okay, then until we meet again.
Meet again. Okay, bye for now.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.